all about your clients, making sure they are ready for what's coming soon. If you're using or planning to use liquids on your sites, today's speakers, Seth Firkenstead and Jordan Smith from Boss, are here to help you frame the messaging to property managers who may be skeptical. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat box on the bottom right of the Bootcamp Live webpage, and we'll be sure to ask them. Welcome, Seth and Jordan. I hear it's snowing in your area today. Love it. Thank you for presenting today and sharing your knowledge with our group.
Thank you so much for the introduction. We are receiving our first snowflakes in October, and just like the rest of winter, it's always unpredictable. So, love to see the snow falling down. As Amanda mentioned, we're going to be talking about liquid de-icing and the use of salt brine within the snowplow and snow operation application. And we are from BSI by Boss, so we'll get started. So, so just to frame up kind of what the problem is with some of the de-icing methods that are currently being used is right now the goal of de-icing is obviously to get to a safe and bare surface so that your patrons aren't slipping, property managers are happy. But what happens with unpredictable snow is that you don't have enough time to properly clear that lot. And so in order to get the melting that is necessary, we're over applying salt in order to get faster reaction to then get a bare surface faster. And so what we then do is switch to using salt brine. And the use of salt brine skips that phase change of the salt molecule turning into brine on the surface of the parking lot. And so by using liquid brine, we've already created that liquid state. We apply the brine directly to the pavement, and that allows us to see faster melting results, thus reducing the amount of salt that we need to apply. So really, we're not changing what is happening with de-icing. We're still using chlorides in order to melt that snow into a water so that the water can then evaporate or run away. We're not changing that, but by using salt brine, what we are trying to do is just accelerate that phase change, and so that we can use the right amount of salt, not needing to over apply, and still get the benefits of fast and clear lots. So let's talk a little bit about science of liquid and how we actually can speed up this phase change.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. So just to extrapolate on that briefly, really what he's saying there is applying salt and spraying brine are doing the exact same thing. So when we spread salt on snow and ice, we're creating salt brine on the parking lot. An endothermic reaction occurs with the salt and the snow and ice. That creates a puddle of brine. As that puddle of brine spreads, it creates a patch of bare pavement. The reason that salt gets over applied in granular form is because in order for us to get to that safe surface quickly, every granule of salt has to be placed extremely close together. In some of our research over the years, we found that the average contractor is putting down between 800 and 1,000 pounds of salt per acre. And science shows that a properly mechanically scraped parking lot should only require between 150 and 200 pounds of salt per acre. The reason for the over-application is not because we scientifically need that much salt or chloride on the lot. It's because we need it to happen quickly. We need those puddles of brine to be created quickly, spread quickly on the parking lot to get to a safe surface. And that over-application is the reason that we always see so much salt left behind on the parking lots after the snow and ice has melted away. Again, as Seth said, by applying that puddle that is normally created by that reaction and applying the puddle being applying brine, what we're doing is skipping that phase change and putting down the scientifically necessary amount of salt, which is that 150 to 200 pounds per acre. So because this is a short presentation, we're not going to dive in super deep on the science, but just at a real high level, when we talk about using salt brine, you've probably heard the number 23.3% by this time. And that is what's called the eutectic point of salt brine, which is the lowest possible freeze point. So for those that are new to brine, you might think, just looking at a chart, if 23.3% is good, 25% must be even better. But what this chart on the screen here shows is that it's absolutely the opposite. As we saturate our salt brine more and more, the freeze point drops. Once we hit that eutectic point, any percentage of brine saturation we go above that our freeze point exponentially rises until we hit that 26.5% point where the brine is fully saturated. And at that 26.5% mix, it will actually freeze at the same temperature as water. So just practically, if you're one of those contractors who's either had this experience or heard from another contractor who had the experience of, I applied brine to the parking lot and the whole thing froze into a sheet of ice. More than likely what happened is you had oversaturated salt brine, which freezes at the same temperature as water. And because of that, when you're applying it, it's probably below freezing and it probably froze to the surface. I think early on, before the educational materials were really readily available in our industry, a lot of people would make a homemade brine maker and they would just mix it for a couple hours and assume if I mix it long enough, it's going to be good. And actually what they were doing is oversaturating their brine and creating something, again, that freezes at the same temperature as water. So that eutectic point is extremely important, regardless of if you're using a purchased brine maker from a company like VSI by Boss, or whether you're using a homemade brine maker, it doesn't matter. That 23.3% eutectic point is extremely important. So far in this presentation, we've been focusing primarily on using liquid as a replacement alternative to granular salt. But the thing that most of you are probably more familiar with using liquid for is as a pre-treatment. So pre-treating is when we go and put the salt brine down before the snow and ice occurs. And the purpose of that treatment is to prevent bond with the pavement so that our mechanical snow removal is more effective and more efficient. When we more effectively mechanically remove our snow, now, even if you are using conventional salt for post-treatment, you have to use less because there's less left on the surface to get rid of. So the analogy we like to use for pre-treating is it's like spraying a frying pan before you cook on it. If you take a frying pan that doesn't have a nonstick coating and you crack an egg on there and it's hot, the egg's going to stick. You're going to have a mess left behind when you go to clean up the pan. If you would have sprayed that pan first, the egg would have peeled up cleanly and the cleanup's a lot easier. Same goes for snow, and that's what a pre-treatment is. Again, this is a short presentation, so we're not going to dive into all these points. So if you want to move forward, Seth, that would be great.
You got it.
So just some high-level numbers. People always want to know what kind of savings can I expect by using liquids. So there's 3 different ways to use liquids in your operation as we know them today. The first is what I just talked about, and that is as a pre-treatment. So that is when you're going out before the snow and ice falls, you're putting down that treatment of brine, you help preventing that bond with the pavement, and you help making your mechanical removal more effective. Just by using liquid as a pre-application, we expect to see salt savings of 30 to 35%. Now, I do like to clarify that the only way you're actually going to save on salt is if you adjust your salting equipment. I know that sounds really obvious, but I've had people come to me and say, well, I pre-treated, but my guys are still using the same amount of salt. Well, yeah, if you don't adjust your salters, obviously you're not going to save any salt. So there has to be a cause and reaction here where we say we are now mechanically scraping cleaner, and thus we can turn down our spinner, turn down our auger, whatever the case may be, depending on your type of salter, and that's where we're going to get our salt savings from. The other way we see this 30 to 35% savings with pretreatment is that simply the act of pre-treating with liquid instead of pre-salting with salt, you're going to see substantial savings. And again, that's because of the precision we can apply liquids with compared to granular product. So a typical pretreatment application is around 40 gallons per acre. For sake of simple math, it's around 80 pounds of salt per acre. To put that in perspective, picture taking 2 bags of softener salt that you see at every gas station in America sitting next to the gas pumps. Take 2 of those tiny little bags and try to spread it evenly over an acre of parking lot. Your granules of salt will be about that far apart. It'd be extremely difficult to get that light of an application down. So one of the ways that we're saving salt with pre-treating with liquid versus pre-salting with salt is just that we can put down a lower amount more precisely and more consistently, and you're going to see salt savings from that as well. The next way to use liquids is as a pre-wet for your salt. So maybe you have a salter that has saddle tanks, and maybe you're pre-wetting at the spinner or at the auger. And we typically see around 35% salt savings with that methodology. And again, that requires adjustment of your settings on your spreader to achieve. But the reason we save salt is, again, because of what Seth led off with, and that is that reaction time. So by wetting our salt with brine before it hits the ground, we're speeding up that reaction where a solid turns into a liquid brine puddle on the parking lot and creates that bare patch of pavement. Because we're speeding up the reaction, we don't need our granules of salt as close together on the lot to get to a bare surface. Thus, we can use less and get the same speed of results that the customers expect. So that's where the salt savings come from when we're pre-wetting our salt. The
Jordan,
last
I
way,
think it's important too to mention just the purpose of some of these pretreatments isn't to prevent any accumulation from coming to the surface. And so when guys are going out and pretreating, you kind of have to adjust your expectation as well that these methods are meant to prevent that bonding, not to prevent any accumulation at all. And so you don't feel the need to apply the same amount of salt as you would in a post treatment when you go out before the storm. Really, what we're doing is getting underneath the accumulation before it comes so that when you come with a mechanical removal, it's more effective. Again, imagine that spraying the spray in your frying pan. You still want the egg to cook, it'll be there, but when you come with your spatula, you just want a nice clean scrape when it's done.
yep.
So it's a little bit of reframing kind of your expectations too with pretreatments.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Seth. It's a question we get asked a lot is how much accumulation will I prevent with the pretreatment? The honest answer is you may prevent some accumulation with the pretreatment, but that is not the objective or goal. So if you go in with the expectation that if I pre-treat, I'm going to prevent 2 inches of snow from sticking, I want it to plow, you're going to be left disappointed because you're not going to prevent 2 inches of accumulation, at least not every time. There may be certain conditions where the ground temperature is above freezing and the snow is coming down slowly enough where it's not building up an insulation layer where it can pile up on, where you may prevent a substantial amount of accumulation, but that's not the ultimate goal of a pretreatment. It can happen, but it's not the primary purpose. So great point, Seth. Thank you. Then the last way we talk about the most substantial cost savings on salt is when we're using liquid as a direct liquid application or a post-treatment. So this is after the snow has fallen, or this is after we have scraped the parking lot, and now we are using liquids to get rid of any residual snow or ice instead of using granular salt. And again, we explained earlier, we can expect up to 70% salt savings by using liquids as a post-treatment as opposed to using granular product as a post-treatment. And again, the reason for that is not because it's some kind of magic. It's not some kind of different product. Again, applying salt brine and applying salt are doing the exact same thing. The reason for the savings is because we can get the speed of results that our customers expect with the proper scientifically necessary amount of salt because we're skipping that phase change on the surface. So we've already covered some of this stuff. And again, I apologize for the rapid speed we're moving through this. But just knowing it's a shorter presentation, we want to keep it high level and certainly always happy to field additional questions after this presentation, or you can always contact us directly to ask any questions you might have. But as we've covered pretty substantially here, why should you consider liquids? It's absolutely a time accelerant to safe surfaces. And the reason for that is because of skipping that phase change. We're not waiting for a solid to turn to a liquid. We're not waiting for that brine puddle to spread on the parking lot. We're applying the puddle right to the lot, getting down to bare pavement very quickly. We just covered cost savings. So we showed you some of the salt savings that you can expect by utilizing liquids in your operation. It's a pretty linear equation there. If you use, let's just use simple numbers. If you use $1,000 worth of salt a year and you save 30% on your salt by pre-treating, you're going to save about $300 on your salt. If you are using liquid for post-treating, you're spending $1,000 a year on salt, you could expect to save up to $700 on salt. Now, I should mention that when I say up to 70%, that's typically going to be best case scenario. Best case scenario when it comes to post-treating with liquids is when you are in an environment where you've scraped the lot relatively clean and you just have that residual glaze left behind. If you have an inch of snowpack left behind, you're not going to see 70% salt savings by using liquid because that's not where liquid thrives and shines. Where liquid does the best is as a proactive, preventative measure as opposed to a reactive measure. Once you get to the point where you have substantial snowpack or ice built up on the lot, your cost savings or your salt savings are going to be diminished. The goal with liquid is always to help prevent that from happening in the first place. So efficiency and effectiveness, again, I've covered some of this a little bit. The efficiency is in the fact that we're skipping that phase change. The efficiency is in the fact that with a liquid de-icing sprayer, we can very accurately and consistently apply the same amount of product. So you may be seeing a number of products coming to market, salting products that have rate control. That's fantastic. I love to see anytime that we can become more precise and accurate in the way that we're doing things. I'm always an advocate of that, whether it's liquid or granular. The one thing I will say is one of the challenges with a rate controlled salt spreader is that the gradation of your salt is going to affect that rate control. So when you buy salt from your supplier, you may get one load of salt where the granules are all 1/2 inch diameter, just big pebbles of salt. And you may get the next load where you have a bunch of crushed up salt that's basically powder and there's just some granules mixed in. Both of those types of salt will work effectively on parking lots. They will not flow the same way through a salting system. So one of the challenges of calibrating a salter is that the gradation of your salt, the moisture content of your salt, the amount of big frozen chunks in your salt is all going to affect the way the product flows through there, thereby making your rate control system potentially less consistent. With a rate controlled liquid sprayer, they have systems built into them where they're automatically adjusting your application rate based on your speed. And on the VSI by Boss units, we're using what's called a magnetic flow meter that automatically adjusts for differences in the type of brine you're using. So whether you're using straight salt brine or whether you're using an 80-20 blend of salt brine and additive, which have different specific gravities, the flow meter on our system automatically adjusts for those differences to always apply the right amount of product. So it's not that you can't get more precise with your salt, it's just easier with liquids. So that efficiency is in the fact that we're always putting down the right amount of product. And when we talk about effectiveness, again, this is one of the things we haven't had time to dive into, is we can use liquids down to temperatures as cold as -30 degrees Fahrenheit. When we're using additives with our brine, in our snow operation here in southern Minnesota, we've effectively de-iced and had standing water puddles in a parking lot at -30 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason we can do that is because of the additives in the salt brine. Salt or salt brine alone is not effective to those kind of temperatures. Environmental impacts, obviously with the savings of salt, we're reducing chloride pollution. That's a pretty simple one, but we're using less salt. The other thing is when we're using brine stays where we put it. There was a Minnesota DOT study done a number of years ago that showed that about 75% of the road salt they put down is ending up on the shoulders of the road and in the ditches, not where we actually need to use the product. One of the beauties of liquid is when we put it down, it stays where we put it. Even think about something as simple as you go down a sidewalk, you spread some salt, and then a little clipper of snow comes through and you go and scrape it half an hour later. I promise you that about 80% of that salt you just applied is getting scraped right into your client's landscape beds and right into their turf, which is why we see the dead turf and landscaping after the snow melt in the springtime. Liquids stay where we put them a lot better. So if we were to do that same process with liquid, we put it down half an hour later, a clipper comes through. More than likely, most of the product is still going to be retained on the surface even after we run a plow over it the next time. So along with that, the reason that regulations around chloride pollution are coming about is because we are over applying salt. It's because the salt we are applying is not staying where we're putting it. It's ending up in our wetlands. It's ending up in our streams and rivers. It's ending up in our groundwater and our drinking water. And chloride is a permanent pollutant, meaning that there is no efficient way to get it out of our water. Water is obviously an essential resource to all of life. So that is why we are starting to see regulations coming around chloride pollution. And then the last thing is just information and education. When we started VSI, and I did a Google search for liquid de-icing, there was almost zero information. Even finding the 23.3% eutectic point was challenging. I had to dive into a detailed scientific study about chlorides to even find what that was. If you do a Google search now for liquid de-icing, you will find literally hundreds of videos, resources. SIMA has entire courses on implementing liquid de-icing. There's a lot of great resources out there. You can go on Facebook groups, on LinkedIn, and find information from other contractors and municipal workers using brine. There's just so much more out there where it's much more accessible to get into than it used to be.
I think that's a great point, Jordan, that liquids has become much more popular and there's a lot more information about it. And so for some contractors looking at the thought of liquids, it can kind of be a scary proposition on new equipment. 23.3 is an exact number to get to, new technology, new training, etc. But really, when you start looking at some of the education and the equipment that is out there, it's meant to make your life easier, not harder. And coming to events like this that SIMA is putting on is an attempt to help get that information out there because liquids can be a huge benefit no matter what your pain point is. Maybe it's a cost saving is really what's driving you to look at liquids, or potentially it's a new site that has a liquids only in its scope of work. Or potentially you have a client who's very environmentally conscious and wants to look at something that's a little bit nicer. Liquids can start to check the boxes on a lot of areas for people. And it does seem to be a win-win for both the property manager and the contractor and the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So it's great that we're doing events like this with SIMA, partnering with them. There's certainly more information out on the VSI by Boss website. There's a nice little playbook, as we call it, about implementing liquids that'll take you through kind of everything from what kind of equipment is out there. It recaps some of the science information, how to apply it, some application rates, et cetera. But certainly, if anyone has questions about VSI or liquids or just snow in general, that's the passion of VSI by Boss. And so certainly we encourage you to reach out to us and ask these questions. Let us know, even if it's about your specific operation and it's a detailed question. We'd love to hear that information from you and help make you a better contractor. We've used the phrase a better way to bare pavement for many years, and that's truly what it's all about. Finding the right tool for you at the right time to help you accomplish that better way to bare pavement. So,
and I think just to wrap it up, Seth, you nailed it on the head. I think that, during the course of our evolution of VSI, we've seen a huge shift from, I think, back to our first trade show we ever went to, and everyone was looking at our stuff like it was an alien spacecraft. Like, what is this? What is liquid de-icing? How can I put water on a parking lot in the wintertime? That's insane. And now, fast forward a decade or more, and the questions are now much more detailed, much more specific, and that's because liquids are becoming a commonplace process in our industry. And not only, I think you mentioned it, but not only are contractors looking to break into this as a better way to bare pavement, their clients are looking for it. I think if I had a tally in front of me, which I don't, I feel like I've had just as many calls this year from contractors saying my client is requiring me to use liquids on their site as I have people saying I want to get into liquids. So demand is being driven both directions, and I think that's typically a pretty indicative tipping point that we're seeing happening here in the industry, where it's not just the contractors pushing it to the clients, it's the clients pushing it back to the contractors saying, this is what we want. It's better for our infrastructure. It's better for the environment. It keeps our lots cleaner, more aesthetically pleasing. We're not getting tracking in our buildings. There's all these benefits we see, and that's why we want it. So it's, I guess in summary, it's something it's here. It's here to stay. It's something that's growing. And if you have more questions, we love to talk shop and talk liquids anytime.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Seth and Jordan. Great information to share with our clients on the advantages of using liquids. We appreciate your time today. How can people get in touch with you if they have further questions or want to reach out?
Yeah, certainly there's contact information on the VSI by Boss website. Otherwise, your local Boss dealer would have access to reach out to their regional sales representatives. We've had many training sessions and discussions with them. So the best way is probably just going out to the website, checking out the YouTube channel. And then when you have a specific question, it's good to come back to us with either an email or a phone call. Again, we'd love to talk snow anytime.
And I should mention, you mentioned the website, Seth, but very specifically, if you go on Google and just type in elevate your liquid IQ, Boss Snowplow, you can find it on the Boss site too, but if you want to just Google it, there's an entire multi-page mini website built for liquid education. And within that site, there's a contact form saying, I want to learn more about liquids. And that's for both contractors and for property owners. So when people submit through there, it gets into our system, and eventually that lead will get routed to talk to one of our liquid experts. So I take a lot of those calls. Adam from our team takes a bunch of those calls. So you can certainly explore those resources, and they work really well because you can kind of get pre-educated on all of the high level stuff. And then you can come to us, make an appointment for a more detailed discussion on what fits your operation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, it's all treats, no tricks here at CIMA. Scan the QR code that'll be coming up on the screen here, or visit the website cima.org/game and enter the code liquids1031. That's LIQUIDS1031 to enter 100 points. Check out cima.org/bootcamp live for access to all the week's live events, video recordings, and more. Specifically for client readiness, check out resources on prepping your clients for winter and a video from our archive on the importance of communication between snow professionals and property managers. So we spent the week getting to know your sites, team, and clients and equipment ready for winter. But what if? We wrap up Winter Boot Camp tomorrow with topics on managing the unexpected. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern for a webinar with Matt Gerdich on what to do if your team gets stranded during an event. See you then, and thanks for joining us today.